Hi, this is TJ Muehlman with another edition of Data in the Wild, where we dive into real data in the real world and figure out how we can make it more useful, more interesting, find some trends, or I don't know, just make a pretty picture out of it. So lately, I've been more and more interested in education data, partly because I have young children. My kids are in first grade and pre K, and mostly because we are doing, as a company, more and more work in the education space. We mostly made our niche in global health, so working with ministries of health around the world to help them understand and explore data. But now we are working in education. So we have several school districts that are using us to help them understand what kind of trends might be happening in their school districts, from attendance to behavior to grades and everything in between, because school system data is kind of a disaster. So every Friday for the last like 3 or 4 weeks, I've spent the afternoon doing two things. One, just tying a little bit of whiskey and wild data is what I'm calling it, and looking at these data sets to try to figure out what's going on. And so one thing I looked at this past Friday is overall graduation statistics for high school kids from 1960 to 2021. So you're looking at here the National Center for Education Statistics. It's a really interesting website with lots of interesting data. I'll probably be diving in here for other data sets. But this one is a really straightforward data set. It's the number of kids who graduate from high school and then enroll in either a 2-year or 4-year school. And it breaks it down by gender, male and female. And so I wanted to kind of paint a picture with this data, because if you look at this data right here, right, it's really interesting, but like, you can't see a trend here, right? There's nothing that jumps out at you as being either interesting or problematic. And this is where data visualizations and structuring data makes a lot of sense. So what I did is I cleaned this data. And when you hear data people talk about cleaning data, what they really mean is they're taking data from a format that looks like this and structuring it in a way that a relational database understands. And by that, I mean giving headers, column headers, meaningful names, removing data points that might be not useful. So for example, we have margin of error in here. We have it's doing some calculations on percent changes that we're going to do a little bit differently. And just overall, like, you wouldn't be able to point a data viz tool at this and be able to paint a pretty picture. It wouldn't really work. So I'm not going to get into the data cleaning process here. I actually have another video which you can look in our playlist to understand how that works. But what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over to our data viz tool, Metabase, and show you exactly what we did. All right. So as you can see, the data that I just showed you in that sort of tabular format and the data we're looking at here is actually identical. It's the same data, but we're now using a data visualization tool to sort of call out certain events and certain things that might be interesting. So the way this works, and we've talked a bunch about this in our videos, is that we take the data, we clean it, then we load it into our platform. It's called Standard Data, which is a data warehousing platform. And then we point Metabase, which is a data viz tool, at that data to actually start to analyze and understand the data. And there's a couple of things that I find really fascinating with this data is, and again, it goes from 1960 to 2021, is in the tabular format, you couldn't really see peaks and valleys, right? But now we can clearly see that there have been peaks and valleys in the number of kids who graduate from high school and the number of kids who end up going on to college. And the thing that I'm really most interested in here is probably the number of kids who go to college. You start to see it started off with boys being more likely to go to college than girls in 1960. And if you're based here in the U.S., you would understand that in the 60s it was more common for men to go to college than women. But then right around the 80s, at some point in the 80s, it started to become more common for females to go to college than males. And you can see here in 2021, in the most recent one, 54.9% of males went on to a 2 or 4 year college, and 69.5% of females went on to a 2 or 4 year college. And that's a pretty big change, again, going from 1960 to 2021 in only 51 years, a massive change. But the number that I'm also really kind of fascinated by was that in 2021, again, the last year we have data, there was a 16% drop in the number of females who graduated from high school. Now, to be clear, this is not adjusted for population. This is just the raw number of women or females who graduated from high school, but a 16% drop. And you can see that drop right here. And if you're alive, then you're aware then the point in time was correlates with COVID. And there was an 8.6% drop in boys who graduated from high school in that same year. Those are pretty big drops. And in fact, I went and analyzed all the data. That's for women, that's the single largest drop in female graduates in the 50 years that we have data for. And one thing I did is we go in here and look a little bit more closely, we have the ability in Metabase to look at events. And what on here. And these events are major changes in sort of the economic status of the country, at least in the U.S. We have recessions going back from 1981, 1991, 2001, 2008, and then COVID, which, I think was technically a recession, or maybe not, but obviously it's a major change. And you can see, what's interesting is you can see when major economic events happen, either that year or shortly thereafter, you start to see a big change in the high school graduation rate. And then the biggest one being here in COVID. So here, like in 2001 was the dot-com bubble. I remember that one all too well. It's when I graduated from college. 2008 was the Great Recession, and then obviously COVID. So you can start to see these points in time affect how many kids graduate from high school. Now, interestingly enough, if you go look at males and females in the graduation rate, high school, college attendance is affected by economic change, but not nearly, or not as dramatic as high school graduation rates. So what we're trying to get at here is data is really, really interesting. It sort of tells these interesting stories, and it's really hard to see that in sort of a tabular format. And that's something that our expertise is in, is helping to understand what's going on with this data. So if you like this video, subscribe, share, tell your friends. We have a lot of other videos. I think we have now like 50 videos in our series, in our various playlists. So take a look at them. We just launched a new Metabase 101 video that will walk you through from kind of what we just did here, from cleaning of data to loading the data to asking the questions to subscribing and sending out alerts and events. And it's a really useful feature or useful video series. It's found in our Metabase playlist. Take a look. Let us know what you think. Thanks a lot.